So yes, today we are talking about Winslow Homer, beloved painter, lithographer, watercolorist. So he was born in Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts in 1836, and Winslow Homer was the second of three sons of Charles Savage Homer and Henrietta Benson Homer, both from long lines of New Englanders. His mother was a gifted amateur watercolorist, and Homer's first teacher. Homer had a happy childhood growing up mostly in then rural Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he was an average student, but his art talent was really evident in his early years. Homer's father, on the other hand, was kind of a volatile, restless businessman who was always looking to make a killing. When Homer was 13, Charles, his father, gave up the hardware store business to seek a fortune in the California gold rush. And when that failed, Charles left his family and went to Europe to raise capital for other get rich quick schemes that unfortunately did not pay off. After Homer's high school graduation, his father saw a newspaper advertisement and arranged for an apprenticeship. Homer's apprenticeship at the age of 19 to J.H. Bufford, a Boston commercial lithographer, was a formative but quote unquote treadmill experience. And at the end of his apprenticeship in 1857, Homer swore never to work for anyone again. He opened his own studio in Boston and established a successful freelance career as a commercial illustrator. So Homer's career as an illustrator lasted nearly 20 years. He contributed illustrations of Boston and rural New England life to magazines such as Bayou's Pictorial and Harper's Weekly, as you can see here. And this was at a time when the market for illustrations was growing rapidly and fads and fashions were changing a lot faster. As well, he often depicted scenes of the Civil War, even being sent to the battlegrounds to depict Northern soldiers and troops. In his early works, mostly commercial wood engravings of kind of urban and country social scenes, they're characterized by dramatic contrasts of light and dark and these kind of lively groups. His quick success was mostly due to this kind of strong understanding of graphic design and also to the adaptability of his designs to wood engravings. I personally love the lithograph of Central Park. It looks like it could be in the desert or the middle of an open field, which I guess it kind of was back in 1862. But just to see how its surroundings have changed over the last, roughly 150 years is fascinating. So after the war, Homer turned his attention to primarily scenes of childhood and young women, reflecting this kind of nostalgia for simpler times, both his own and the nation as a whole. Though he was a self-taught painter, Homer was receptive to the newer trends coming out of Europe. So among Homer's works, Beach Scene here comes closest to Impressionism, both for its brushstrokes and its luminosity. In order to paint it, Homer put his canvas parallel to the shoreline, but kind of a few feet back from it, which resulted in this composition that's structured through three broad horizontal bands of kind of identical size. As you can see, there's the sky, the water, and the sand, with the children kind of placed in between. And the scene is almost devoid of incidental detail, and the perspective seems a little flattened, but perhaps the most striking element is the emphasis on the reflections of the children on the wet sand and the liveliness of which contrasts with the real figures. Snap the Whip, one of Homer's most beloved works, evoked again this kind of nostalgia for the nation's agrarian past as the population shifted to cities, and the notion of the quote unquote little red schoolhouse faded from memory. Homer spent several summers in New York's Hudson Valley and is said to have been inspired to paint this scene by local boys playing at the Hurley Schoolhouse. Homer actually painted a second version with a similar date, which is now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And in this, he retains the schoolhouse, but the background hillscape is removed, making the location a little less regionally specific. But because it seems the quintessential embodiment of the American spirit, this painting is one of Winslow Homer's most discussed and reproduced works. Following an extended trip to Europe in 1866 and 1867, Homer adopted kind of a warmer palette. a looser brush technique, and an interest in painting outdoor scenes that owed much to the influence of contemporary French artists such as Courbet, Manet, and Monet. And upon his return to the US, Homer turned his attention to lively scenes of sports and recreation, painting these kind of warm and appealing images that perfectly suited the prevalent post-war nostalgia for a simpler, more innocent America. So Breezing Up, A Fair Wind, was painted during the country's centennial year and has become a well-known and beloved artistic image of life in the 19th century America. And we can see it was even commemorated as a stamp in 1962. The dramatic rescue from a foundering ship shown here was made possible by a recent innovation in life-saving technology. It's called the breeches buoy. So it's secured firmly to ship and shore. The device permitted the transfer of stranded passengers to safety by means of this pulley that was kind of hauled back and forth by crews at either end. Cropped down to its essentials, Homer's composition thrusts us into the midst of the action with these massive waves rolling past, drenching the semi-conscious woman and her anonymous savior. The lifeline was immediately recognized by critics as a major contribution to American art, portraying a heroic contemporary subject with both virtuosity and detailed observation. And this also kind of ties into the featured speaker today, as AJ and Jacques mentioned, Graham Sherman, who's from the US Coast Guard. Another major theme throughout Homer's career was this kind of brevity of life and how precious it can be and how quickly it can end. And he reminds us of our mortality in this piece. So this one kind of reminds me of the story AJ told with the shark-infested waters. So Homer crossed the Gulf Stream numerous times. His first trip to the Caribbean in 1885 seems to have inspired several related works dated from the same year. Another possible inspiration for the series of watercolors and this piece, the Gulf Stream itself, was McCabe's Curse, a Bahamian tale about a British Captain McCabe who in 1814 was robbed by thieves, hired a small boat in hopes of reaching a nearby island, but was caught in a storm and later died in Nassau of yellow fever. So again, Homer plays with the idea of mortality and the fragility of human life. We can see the turbulent waves, the ominous sky, and the circling sharks. Here we have both a watercolor and an oil version of Hound and Hunter, and this highlights his proficiency in both mediums. At this point, Homer was living in Proutsneck, Maine, and he guarded his technical methods and personal beliefs and became almost a recluse. We could see the watercolor version has kind of deeper blues and greens, whereas the oil version focuses kind of on warmer oranges and earth tones. When this final canvas was exhibited in 1892, its subject was condemned as this cruel sport then practiced in the Adirondacks. Some viewers believed that the youth was drowning the deer to save ammunition, but the artist curtly responded, and he said, "The critics may think that the deer is alive, but he is not. Otherwise, the boat and man would be knocked high and dry." I think is interesting. So Homer often enjoyed fishing trips in the wilderness of Quebec with his brother Charles. He based this unfinished painting on watercolors created during their last visit to Canada in 1902. And family tradition suggests that it records a perilous canoe journey down the Saguenay River, and that Charles is the frightened passenger holding on to the edge of the boat. Unfinished are the paddles, the foam near the riverbed, and the guide's facial features. And he marked his intended revisions in chalk, but didn't get to complete the full piece. But the artist's family believed that he considered the painting complete in its essentials, and they donated it to the Met Museum after his death in 1910. So this is Children Under a Palm, done in 1885. And the interesting thing about this piece is that it was featured on an episode of BBC's Fake or Fortune, which examines the paintings that have controversy in their provenance, which just means their ownership history. So the figure in the center is Lady Olive Blake. And this piece was brought to Sotheby's by Philip Mould, who discovered it at an antiques roadshow and identified it as a Winslow Homer piece. It was valued by Sotheby's at $100,000, but a day before the sale to Sotheby's was going through, a man named Simon Murray, who was the great grandson of Sir Henry Blake, related to Lady Olive Blake, came forward to claim ownership of the piece on behalf of the family. So when the episode featuring this piece aired in 2011, legal ownership was still under dispute. And the most recent update was in 2018, saying that the court battle was still going on. I'm not sure what's happening with it in 2021, but it seems to have much controversy. So it's fitting that for an artist whose long career explored various media from printmaking to watercolors to oil painting, that his influence would be equally diverse. Winslow Homer is considered one of the foremost painters in 19th century America and a preeminent figure in American art. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you stay on this one particular photo?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for a second, because I think, Sarah, what I found particularly interesting is that the family had brought it to the Antiques Roadshow. They actually found it in a trash can, a dump in Ireland. And apparently that dump, I don't know if you knew, Sarah, was actually literally across the street from the estate of the family that then later claimed ownership of it. Yeah. So who owns your garbage?
Yeah, right.
Right.
In this case, that's a really important question to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I was reading, I think there's some sort of Irish law that's like a finders keepers kind of law. So
Right,
that
yeah.
was, part of the dispute.
Yeah. So be careful what you throw out.
That's right.
And I think just a comment, man, I think out of all the American artists, some of Winslow Homer's paintings have such a strong sense of nostalgia that other American artists haven't been able to do. It's just amazing.
It is. Yeah, my favorite is the Breeze It Up, which is
Uh-huh.
the Fair Wind.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you're a sailor, so.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, thank you so much, Sarah. Really, really appreciate it. Fascinating about one of America's great artists.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.